the studios, like, what have they already tried to get away with when it
Mhm.
comes to AI?
Oh my God, so much. Like, I think that the key thing to say about this whole kind of discussion that we're having now and these strikes that are happening is that I think one thing that Fran said in her speech was really key, right? She pointed to streaming, she pointed to digital, and she pointed to AI. And, we're really focused on AI in this moment because, we're in the middle of the big generative AI hype boom. But we know that part of the reason this has happened and part of the reason these unions are on strike is because the streaming model was used by these companies, these increasingly consolidated entertainment giants and tech companies, to transform the business model of the industry, to change the way people are being paid for shows and the work that they're doing, as you and Harry were discussing. But then I think you can even go back before that and see like the digital revolution that has kind of been happening since the 2000s is part of
Mhm.
this much larger project by the studios in particular, but also these tech companies who've moved in with the streaming boom,
Right.
to really remake the business model of the industry to ensure that they are getting more of the money, they have more control over the industry and over the people who work in it, and are going to basically remake that business model to serve them. And so now what we're seeing with AI, it's not so much the threat that everyone's going to lose their jobs. It's we're further de-skilling the work that goes into making these productions, and we're setting it up so maybe we're going to scan you and get your likeness as an actor, and now we're going to be able to have visual effects teams who we've outsourced to Southeast Asia and who are non-union and get paid very little money to use that scan to kind of generate whatever you're doing in the computer, right? So we don't need to
Mhm.
you and we don't need to pay you for that performance. Or it's not that chat gpt is going to be churning out like fabulous scripts that we're going to turn into movies and tv shows, but maybe we can use a chatbot or a large language model to churn out something that's just going to be like decent, and then we can pay a writer to come in and kind of spice it up and add a bit more to it and like fix up the problems and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's not that the workers aren't there at all, it's just that you're reducing the money that you're paying on labor and you're ensuring that they are in kind of like the less important roles, I guess, so
Mhm.
that they're not as important, they're paid less, they have, again, they have no kind of way to say, actually, I deserve to get a residual for this, I deserve to get some sort of kind of ongoing payment, because you're turning it basically into a gig economy even more than it already is, to say we're
Absolutely.
just hiring you at these really cheap rates to do this small amount of work, don't expect anything more than that.
Yes. Let's just parse that out. So the very first thing I think you articulated really incredibly about this, like how consolidated
Mhm.
Hollywood has become and
Yeah,
the industries have become, and actually how much of a business it has become. I think it's always been
totally.
kind of like a running joke, or, you got to do the big blockbusters. But truly, as consolidation has happened, this is just making returns for the shareholders and absolutely nothing for the people creating the content. I always get into this debate with my husband. He's always like, well, more is good. Like, more streaming means more shows. And so we could pitch and get a show sold, and friends have as well. And so it's like, this is a good thing, but it's not actually, if you're cheapening what it means and what it is to, sell a show and to be able to survive as a creative.
Totally. And you think about it, right? And sure, the number of shows that we have has expanded, quite considerably as part of the streaming boom. But the number of episodes hasn't expanded as much because we went from having 20 odd episode seasons that were running on cable and broadcast television
Right.
to like, 6 to 10 episode seasons that are on streaming services. And now you don't need to pay the residuals because it's just sitting in your streaming library and you're not kind of selling the rights on to kind of international markets, or you're not selling it on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever. And so, you pay once and then it's yours and then you do whatever you want with it. And we see now that some of these companies, I think, listeners will be familiar, or viewers will be familiar with seeing in recent months, Disney taking shows off its service, HBO Max and now Max, whatever you want to call it, taking
Right.
shows off its service, right? Because they see, oh, we're actually having to pay money for this content to keep it on the service, or we might kind of get more savings or a better tax write-off if we kick it off of the service, right? And
Jesus.
just to get to your point on consolidation, like what we really saw, and this was already happening before the streaming boom, because you remember in the kind of first decade of the 2000s, Disney was buying up Pixar and Star Wars and Marvel, and was
Right.
already sort of growing itself to buying up all this IP at that moment. But then you have these massive tech companies like Amazon and Netflix moving into the space. And because they are seen by Wall Street as tech companies, and they
Yeah.
are going to rapidly expand, they're going to go global, they can lose a ton of money, it doesn't matter, because they'll eventually get a monopoly and make a lot of money for us. They could just go for it, right? They could spend like crazy in a way that a traditional company and an entertainment company could not. So then for the Disneys and the NBC Universals and all these to compete, they had to consolidate as well to get larger so that they could compete on the level of the tech companies. So the tech companies enter, they bring in the streaming model, they have all this money behind them from the tech investors in Wall Street, and then that forces the rest of the industry to remake itself around this model that the tech industry is pushing.
Yes.
And that's part of the reason that we get to where we are today.
The HBO Max example to me, like, is a great example of like where we're at in terms of what is valued, because HBO has had this incredible reputation for creating great art, and why would you remove the HBO name? Because that's it's like you have a certain standard, and the reason is Discovery bought it, and so they're going to put all their crap, no disrespect to Chip and Joanna, but disrespect, and you know, and they're going to put all their home and nature shows and, you know, Naked and Afraid or whatever else they're putting on it. And so, you know,
90 Day Fiance, don't forget that
90 Day
one.
Fiance.
And
so,
just like that, which terrible.
Yeah.
But I feel like, but this is like, you know, instead of like prioritizing HBO, you're going to get art. It's a very cultivated experience. It's like, no, you're going to get everything now.
Yeah.
It's like the HBO part does not matter. That's not what's driving it. And they're not particularly worried about, you know, winning awards or great content. This is going to make more money because it's cheaper to produce whatever Discovery was producing than what HBO was producing.
Exactly, because it's all reality, so it's really cheap to make. You don't always even need to use union production and crews and all that kind of stuff to make it, so it's cheaper to make your reality TV shows. But then also there was the belief, you know, if you've read kind of the reporting on this, that having HBO in the title potentially limited the market share because HBO is seen as adult, and so families wouldn't want to have it. So we need to get HBO out of there. So then we'll just call it Max, and now families will all subscribe and they'll love it, and they'll see that we have all this other content beyond, you know, the steamy HBO shows.
Right. And like, so that when you put it in that framework, of course actors and writers are going to go on strike. It's the only thing they have left to do. It's the only people who are actually looking out for not just the workers, but like the quality of the work that is being produced. You know, I mean, and writers know that firsthand, being squeezed in these tiny mini rooms to break story on a massive show and not see the money from it. So it's just like, you know, no one's pressing the brakes. No one is saying maybe we shouldn't, maybe this is like going to be bad. Because it's changed. And I think it's interesting to see when Apple and Netflix and these tech companies are getting into it. It's like, they don't give a fuck about entertainment. Absolutely, they just want your eyeballs on this show and on the next thing and on the next thing. And then in perpetuity. I mean, and I think, Ari, you made this point, which is like, maybe we just all go outside. Maybe we just stop. And I'm like, yes. At the same time, apparently they're not calling for consumer boycotts yet. Yeah. But like, you know, I got, you know, family and friends and people are like, you want to go see Barbie or you want to go see Oppenheimer? I'm like, I don't know. I kind of want to, you know, like, damn it all to hell. Like, fuck it. Because why? Who's excited about this shit?
I mean, I say download some torrents of NBC's Homicide, which does not have a distribution deal on any streamer as a result of all the music that was used during the period, and watch that, because that's not hurting anybody. No one's getting money from that, and you're watching a show that I say is perhaps superior to The Wire. Perhaps.
Ooh, really? Really?
Homicide is incredible. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Andre Braugher and Kyle Secor, just incredible.
I have to admit, I will probably be going to see both of those films, but you know, it's in the cinema, so they'll still get the residuals.
They're both probably going to be great,
stuff, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
So I feel less bad about that. It's the streaming stuff that I feel like is the biggest problem there, right? And to pick up on something you were saying, like, I think that the strike is essential, right? And I think that we shouldn't forget that it was 1960, the last time these two unions were on strike together. And that was the moment when they went on strike that they kind of set up this framework that you have now. So you get residuals and you get a pension plan and you get health insurance if you hit the threshold that you were talking about earlier. And so now it does seem really essential that these unions go on strike, because they can see that this model that they set up that was working for them, that allowed them to actually survive by doing this career, has been torn apart by these companies. And they've used digital technology to get us all to buy into that shift, right? And the promise was, don't worry, we're going to use these technologies. The consumers are going to get this great experience. It's going to be great for the workers. Everyone's going to benefit, right? We see that as not what happened. And that's usually what happens with technology. We get misled in these ways. But that's why it's so essential now that these unions need to be on strike. A couple of years ago, we almost saw IATSE, which is the union that covers like a lot of the below the line workers, your cinematographers, your set designers, your costume designers, stuff like that, were on the cusp of going on strike. And at the last minute, they decided not to. They'll be up for renegotiation next year. And so depending on what happens here, that could mean big things for them as well, right? And there's a lot of other unions around the world who are not the American unions, which are kind of the most powerful entertainment unions in the world. Like up here in Canada, where I am, the unions are watching what the unions in the US are doing, because when they go for renegotiation next year, they're going to be asking for all the same things. So the fight is so important.
Yeah, and because these, the studios are going to be searching for other countries, other places to film. If their productions are being stopped, they're going to go somewhere else. They're going to try and so it is, it's pretty fucking cool how it's setting up this like global, labor solidarity moment.
Absolutely. And it's the American unions that kind of have to do it, right? Because like if you just had a Canadian union going on strike and asking for this stuff, they'd be like, fuck you. We don't care, Okay. They don't have the leverage, right? But
Gosling,
if the Americans
however,
can get it.
I wonder, Gosling's probably with SAG, but he is Canadian.
He's probably with both, I would say. I don't know if that's a possibility, but he's definitely with SAG. Yeah.
Can I just ask about the AI thing? Because you've sort of imploded the idea that like AI is, sort of self-sufficient and can just go off and write a thing and do a thing. Talk about like how much human work goes into AI creation.
So much. There was reporting from Time Magazine earlier this year about the Kenyan workers who were key to creating ChatGPT and making this system work. And they were paid $2 an hour. And the Wall Street Journal just had an interview and a story that the reporter Karen Howe went over to Nairobi, I believe, spoke to a number of these workers. And basically they described, because their job was to read like the really sexually explicit stuff of like, rape and child abuse and all that kind of stuff, and just all the worst things that you can imagine, to try to ensure that could be filtered out of the system so it wasn't spitting that out at regular users. And so Wall Street Journal talked to them and they were like, we are scarred, like we've had relationships fall apart, like it completely changed our lives. And like, because we had to read all this stuff and internalize it for 6 months as we were working for this company. And it made such a huge difference, like negative difference to our lives. And they got $2 an hour, right? But this is the way it works with so much of these AI tools. You're using this really poorly paid labor to make these things work. And they don't have nearly the impact that the tech companies want us to believe. I always say to people, think back to the mid 2010s, right? Remember in that moment when everyone was going on about how all the robots were going to take our jobs and the self-driving cars were going to get rid of truck drivers and taxi drivers, and there were going to be robots making our coffees and making our McDonald's and all this kind of stuff. Like, this was the future that was just a few years away, and it never happened. But that distracted us from recognizing, or from, really kind of going in on the fact that the gig economy was growing, and Uber and these other companies were using apps to carve people out of employment rights. And Amazon was expanding algorithmic management through its warehouses and its delivery services, and taking jobs that used to be union jobs, working in warehouses, doing deliveries like USPS and UPS. Again, UPS workers might be going on strike soon.
Yes.
Total solidarity to them as well. But created these systems where now the warehouse workers at Amazon, other than one warehouse in Staten Island, are non-union, and they're paid much less than you would at a unionized warehouse. The chance of injury is much higher because you have these much higher production targets. We know that they have to pee in bottles because they don't have the time to go do bathroom breaks. And it's the same with these delivery workers, right? They're hired by third-party companies. They're non-union. They're paid shit. And that's to ensure that they're using less UPS, less USPS because these are union and they don't want any involvement.
But there's a sleek app, Paris, that divides us from the unwashed masses getting into accidents. Like, it's just incredible that, the promise was that, people wouldn't be affected. Everyone wins. Like, no. You just promised us now you just given us a buffer and made consumers feel like, no, at the touch of a button, I need my thing. Delivered by an actual physical person, still created by a physical person.
It's de-skilling the labor across the economy that's so essential to everything, allowing these employers to pay people less, but also to give them more control over labor, right? This is how it works. This is how it always works. And now with this strike, we're seeing directly how this is impacting the entertainment industry, how it's impacted writers, how it's impacted actors, how it's impacted other people in that kind of profession. But as this kind of generative AI boom has been taking off since ChatGPT was released in November of last year, we've seen, on the one hand, all of these tech companies saying, oh my God, it's a threat to humanity. Like, what is it going to mean for us? All of our jobs are going away.
How can I get rich off of this? How can I develop my own thing?
But these narratives are, again, if we're thinking back to like the mid 2010s, these narratives are the distraction again, right? It's a threat to humanity. What's it going to mean for the human race? All this kind of stuff. Total distraction. Doesn't matter. What matters is how they're going to use these tools again to de-skill labor, like they're trying to do in entertainment or like they're trying to do to journalists right now. And it will hit other industries as well. So that again, they're paying you less, you have fewer employment rights, and the boss has more power and is making more of the money. This is how it always works.
I think that distinction is really interesting, just how, because I've certainly said those kinds of things too, like we're all going to be replaced, but you've drawn a distinction between what replacement looks like. You're talking about de-skilling labor. So for example, in our industry, they won't use human beings necessarily, this quote unquote skilled labor, to act in things, right? But they're going to need people to do all the coding, or I know nothing about technology, but do all this stuff that is necessary to feed the machines, and that's going to
visual effects work and all that kind of stuff.
And so you've gotten rid of your biggest cost, and now you're just spending less to have people do completely unreasonable amounts of work for very little. So
it's very Elysium. Like I've only seen that movie once. And it's just like, you're like, and I reference it all the time, but it's very like, I'm going to build the robot that will eventually take my job. Like when I imagine AI, like, if you're coding for an AI artist, you are effectively coding something that's going to take your job. Like you're, like, okay, this can do my artwork, because I've fed it all of these things or whatnot. I don't know how it works.
Totally. And like rest of world has done some really good reporting on this as well, especially looking like outside the United States and what it has meant for workers there. Like they talked a few months ago to this video game designer in like graphic designer in China. And she used to be paid to kind of put these promotional graphics and put these other kind of things together for these video game companies. And then they cut her off because they started using like Stable Diffusion or Dolly or whatever instead. But then they hired her back and paid her 10 times less just to fix up the AI generated images, right?
Up. Yeah, no, that's
exactly.
That's it. And it's funny because I like, even just I'm on Instagram, so I'll like I've seen like, different accounts that I'm like, whoa, hang on. Yeah. That is clearly not a photograph. That's not a Shutterstock image. That's an AI generated image. I can tell that from a mile away. That's what that is. And you're using the headline's real. That image is not real. Or like on YouTube, right? There's like news stories that get like fed to you. And I'm like, I'll click on it. And I'm like, no. That's not a voiceover actor. Actor. That's not a voiceover journalist or whatnot. That's not what I used to do at AJ Plus, just sort of like, reading the headlines and whatnot, giving you the whole thing. No, that's AI. That's an AI generated voice. I can hear that that's an AI generated voice. And like when I usually X out of it unless I'm like kind of curious about like, some dumb backstory of a celebrity. But yeah, it's terrifying. I want to pivot though, because Hari started talking about threads.
Can I say one
initially.
thing about that?
Please.
On the AI voice, because that is another place where we're seeing this hit big time. Disney is one of the leaders in really pushing the replacement of actors with AI and visual effects and stuff. We can see, I don't know if it's a Disney movie, actually, the recent Indiana Jones, but they kind of de-age Harrison Ford. But of course, they've kind of brought back dead actors in Star Wars, and recreated them kind of with visual effects instead of just casting someone new. And they made a deal, I believe it was last year, because James Earl Jones is not doing the voice of Darth Vader anymore because he's a very old man at this point. And so they made a deal so they can use his voice and use an AI program to constantly just churn out new Darth Vader lines using his voice that has been trained on his previous kind of, the previous Darth Vader stuff he's done, right? And voice actors in particular are saying that it's a real risk to us because our voices are out there, they're out in the public, and they say that people are just scraping their voices, making these tools without their permission, and then kind of generating ads or YouTube clips or whatever using their voices, and they've never given permission for it to be used that way, but people can grab it, so they're just doing it anyway. So it's really shocking to see how some of these tools are used and how just shameless some people are in how they'll exploit people.
Can I also just say, this is random, but Hardy, did you ever do stand-up at the Brainwash in San Francisco? Do you remember that spot?
Yeah, the laundry place that you do stand-up to people who are doing their laundry. I did it once, and that was enough.
No, that's all you needed to do. It is a lot of open mic vibes, a lot of weed smoke, but very funny. But so, okay, this is so random, Paris, but did you know, and Hardy, did you know that someone would film everyone's set there, and it was on a live stream, and it was okay. And I remember the old guy who would do it, and he's like, yeah, well, hey, I'm filming, and we're gonna, it's gonna be up on the stream. I'm like, okay, two weirdos are gonna watch it. Nobody's watching. It's an open mic.
Yes.
I forgot which company, but some tech company in Silicon Valley took that feed and used everyone's image, every comic's face.
My God.
For some generative, I'll find it exactly. This is me misremembering. Paris, do you remember? Do you remember that? Do you know that story at all?
I don't know the story, but it doesn't surprise me one bit.
So they just they combed this random video. I mean, because there was hours and hours and hours of stand-ups doing bad material, and they created a database of faces based on that. Wild shit.
Wild.
Anyway,
this is what they do, right?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of lawsuits right now in U.S. court over OpenAI and these other AI systems because they basically went out onto the web, scraped whatever they could get, and used it to train their AI services. And so you have a bunch of copyrighted material in there. You have a bunch of just regular stuff that average people kind of posted online or over the couple decades that we've kind of been doing this. And so there are suits about copyright infringement by companies and artists, but there are also suits saying that it's actually a breach of people's privacy rights as well, because they went onto these services and scraped all this kind of personal information and used it to train their systems. And a lot of them won't even say what exactly, OpenAI, for example, which used to be this nonprofit that it's in the name, OpenAI, that promised it was going to do everything out in the open, won't even tell you what it used to train its services on, because of course it went private. It wants to make the money. It has the big deal at Microsoft now. Yeah, it's just terrible.
And there's million-year-old legislators who don't understand any of this, or making no attempts to understand it, so they can't make legislation to prevent any of it before it happens.
Unless
what worries me
China.
Then it's bad, very bad. But what worries me is you see the Biden administration or something trying to look like they're getting a handle on AI, and it's so we had a meeting and we brought in all the AI CEOs. It's no, they're not the people you should be talking to, because they just want to shape the regulation to help themselves.
Absolutely.
It's you're talking to the wrong folks.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.